What's up, guys? Rick from DFS On Demand here to answer some questions that I get about creating lineups for the PGA. This is something that I get asked about all the time, and with this week being the AT&T Pebble Beach, I thought it was an opportunity to go through my full exposure. This is actually the lineups that I am playing tomorrow. It's Wednesday night. I will not post this video until the contest actually locks, but I'll show you what all of my lineups and all my exposure are. Before we do that, I like to do more of these larger strategy videos, and I never ask you to do this, but if you enjoy this, like, subscribe, and comment below so that I know to continue to do these. I'm just kind of gauging interest here, so do that for me. All right, so what we're looking at here for the Pebble Beach is I've done a lot of different things. I'm playing more cash these days. I'm dipping my toe into the water in terms of optimizers, which is something I've never done before, but I'm still definitely sticking to my roots of making a lot of lineups by hand and using our core cascading strategy, which is something I'll talk about in just a second, and kind of finding what works best for me. So I'm just going to show you the spreadsheet here. I will link this in the description. So if you want to go down and follow along with this throughout the week, I'll try to update this with anything interesting that's coming up. We'll follow the results of it. But these are literally all the lineups that I'm going to play. There's 230 lineups. It's $447 worth of entries spread out over a bunch of different contests. And if you've watched these videos before, you know that my overarching kind of theme is to only play tournaments that I can max enter. I feel like if you're not max entering a contest, you are already at a significant disadvantage. The math, of course, bears that out. So what you'll see me do is you'll see me play a lot of 3 max, a lot of 20 max. And then, of course, I will throw some bullets in, like, you know, the big $100,000 to first where I'm not maxing it today or this week. I understand that I'm much more, minus EV with only 4 or 5 lineups in a big contest like that where I could put 150 in, but that's just my, hey, in case I have the nut lineup, I don't want to lose out on $100,000. All right. So also, there's some there's new contests on DraftKings this week that actually kind of sparked a lot of this interest. I think there's a promo for these micro millions where basically, if I read this correctly, they're giving you half of your buy-ins back. So I went ahead and I max entered like the $3, the $1, the 50 cent or whatever. And I'm using it as an opportunity to test out different optimizer strategies. So let's go through this. We'll start with the top, which is the $25,000 wedge. It's a 3-entry max. It's a $50 buy-in. So we have 3 lineups for $150. I created all of these lineups by hand. They're right here at the top. This was me just sitting down and kind of grinding over the player pool and coming up with the best combinations that I could think of. I did not want to leave it to an optimizer here. I'm not a huge fan of optimizers and how they actually come up with these lineups, but for these, I just did a pure handmade lineups. I leaned a lot on Spieth and on Jason Day, Russell Henley, guys that are essentially my core players that I wanted to play. I found ways to get them in. Those were all made by hand. Same goes for the Pat Mayo Experience. That's actually, I duped this lineup in one of the 3-entry max, the wedge tournaments, because I figured if it's good enough to win in a field of about 700, it's good enough to win in a field for 2,000 or 3,000. That was a similar mindset. Additionally, for my heads up, so I rarely play any cash games, but I've been playing them over the course of the last couple of weeks, and I've done really well. And I'm trying to shift my mindset to get to a much safer place to a cash game lineup. So I've just been doing like $10 heads ups to kind of get a feel of what a good potential ROI is and to see what lineups are out there. I play the same lineup in all of them. Again, this was a handmade lineup that I'm going to roll out in all of these. I looked at a lot of calculations that I've done, whether it be highest cut percentage, right? So guys who are more likely to make the cut. Chesson Hadley shows up here. He shows up quite a bit, which is going to be a little bit unfortunate if things go awry. We have way too much of him, way more than I would want, but as you'll see, that's kind of how this shakes out. Went with Spieth, went with Snedeker, went with Russell Knox, went with Paul Casey. I don't know if that's a good cash game lineup. It's probably not. Spieth is probably too risky here, but I loved his price. I think Sneds is fine. I think Knox is probably fine. He was the last guy I got in. Champ I like just because we're going to play 54 holes, and he's going to make a lot of birdies. If he misses the cut, he's probably going to make a lot of birdies and score me a pretty decent floor anyway. And then Casey's just one of the safest guys week in and week out. So this might be a terrible cash game lineup. I don't play a lot of them, but this is what I'm going to roll out this week. What you'll notice for my 4 entries into drive the green, these are basically the lineups that I played in the $50 3 max and my cash game lineup in case one of them happens to be the nuts. This is like my safety net of not missing out on $100,000. Okay. So that's what I've done. And then we start to get into the interesting stuff here. So this core cascading. So this is the $3 20 max. They call it the micro millions this week. Okay. This is the 60K guaranteed. This strategy is core cascading, which is the strategy that I use to win a GPP at the Masters. And we talked about it a little bit before, where I create a single core lineup. In this case, it is going back to Matt Every. Unfortunately, it's Every, Reavie, Scott, Spieth, Snedeker, and Champ. Using Matt Every here allowed me to jam a lot of, $8,000 and $9,000 guys into this lineup. So that's what I opted to do. And then we start with that single core lineup, and then we replace each position 3 times. So for example, I take Cameron Champ out 3 times and I replace him with similarly priced players in his range that I might like. But this also gives me a chance to get exposure to guys that I normally would not have exposure to. So I just threw in JB Holmes, Andrew Putnam, and Russ Henley, who are guys that at least showed up on my model or showed up in my mind for one reason or another. Then I replaced Snedeker 3 times with Knox, Doug Gim, and Dylan Fratelli. Replaced Spieth with Patrick Reed, Paul Casey, and Brandon Grace. Replaced Adam Scott with, again, Grace, Lowry, Adam Hadwin. Replaced Reavie with Sung Jae, Matt Fitzpatrick, Brandon Grace. And then finally replaced Matt Every 4 times. So one of these guys you'll have to replace 4 times. Sometimes I opt to replace 4 times at the top of this. So our highest priced golfer would have been Spieth. A lot of times I'll opt to replace him 4 times, but I already had a lot of other guys in his price range. I didn't think that was going to be as beneficial as trying to get 4 different bullets away from Matt Every in case he really tanks here, and just hoping the rest, if the rest of this core is great, we have 5 different players with that core that we hopefully nail, which are going to be Ben Silverman, Julian Etulain, Freddie Jakobsen, and Jonas Blixt. Excuse me. So those are the guys that we replaced with for Every there. So this is still a manual process. This is me going through by hand and just putting these guys in. Then we start to get to the optimized lineups. Okay. So now we've got a 20 max $1. And what I did here is I took a calculation of the highest win percentage. So for example, Dustin Johnson is about a 13.5% chance to win this event. We threw all of the win percentages into an optimizer and said, give me the best 20 lineups by total win percentage. And this is what it spit out. There's a ton of Dustin Johnson, as you can imagine, and there's a ton of Jason Day. Okay. And there's a lot of them in each one of these lineups, and a lot of Matt Every again, unfortunately, a lot of Jim Furyk, a lot of Chesson Hadley who show up here. So that is optimized by win percentage. And then what I did, actually, I'll come back to this because I think I have another one here. If you've been following along with me on Twitter or other places, I'm a big fan of leaving money on the table. For a lot of reasons. A lot of the optimal lineups do not spend close to $50,000. Just by spending less, you inherently get a lot of unique builds and you get to be a little bit different. So I optimized 20 lineups based on my projections, my DraftKings projections, but set my cap instead of 50,000 at 49,500. So you can see the salaries over here, just a lot in between, 49.3 or 49.2 and 49.5, which is just going to inherently give me a unique build. So I didn't feel the need to necessarily take a stand on anybody. I didn't feel the need to really do anything special outside of projections here, because I'm starting my builds at a different price. That was going to be unique enough. And then finally with with the combination of the micro mini max, which is $150 entry. It's 50 cents a piece. It's only $75 for all of these entries. And the 3-course rotation for Pebble Beach this week, what I did was I made 3 50 lineup stacks of each starting course, essentially. So I did a stack of golfers who are starting at Monterey Peninsula, 50 lineups of 6 guys who are all playing Monterey Peninsula. Then 50 lineups of 6 guys who are all starting on Pebble Beach, and then 50 lineups of 6 guys who are all starting at Spyglass Hill. And the reasoning behind this is, one, it will probably be unique that we will have 6 players all from the same field. This might be a really suboptimal way to do this, especially if we don't get bad weather or we don't get a clear difference in starting flight. If we do get, if there is going to be a big difference in which course to start at, that's great for us because we're going to have 50 lineups with 6 guys from that wave. So I think that that's worth the risk in a tournament like this. If there ends up being no discernible difference, this is probably a suboptimal strategy because we're just banking on a bunch of guys from the same course all playing well at the same time, which doesn't really make much sense, but we're kind of rooting for one of these courses to really be the good end of the draw. All right. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then what I've done is I've got all of my exposure here, right? And I've got it broken down by each player in total, and then also by each tournament. So what you'll see in total are, we have shares of basically everyone. Guys that we would really hate to win this would be Tommy Fleetwood and Matt Kuchar, who we have less than 1% on. Phil Mickelson, we will be massively underweight. We only have him in 2.5%. Matt Fitzpatrick, guys like that, right? You can see the single-digit numbers. But guys that we are overweight on, whether it's Jason Day, whether it's Jordan Spieth, whether it's Rafa Cabrera-Bello, if one of these guys goes nuts and wins this thing, those lineups are going to be in really good shape. But then if you keep scrolling down here, this is where our week is going to hinge, and it's going to hinge on Chesson Hadley, which is not really a stand I love taking, but he showed up in a lot of my cash lineups. He showed up in a lot of models this week, so I understand why he is so popular. We have 80% of him in the micro dollar. We have 100% of him in the micro jukebox. It is concerning. Our week will hinge on Chesson Hadley, but again, he's going to play 3 rounds. So even if he stinks it up, hopefully he can get some birdies and we'll only miss out on 1 round of him. So I'm not as nervous about investing 40% of all my lineups in one guy as I normally would be, although I'm not thrilled about it. A couple of other interesting things that came out of this is the optimizations of the micro dollar, which was by win percentage, have 100% lineups of Dustin Johnson, and 95 of them also have Jason Day, which is pretty incredible because then you can see how that would actually pan out the rest of the ownership, where you have a little bit of Spieth, a little bit of Grace, a little bit of Cabrera-Bello. You have a lot of Hadley in that lineup as well, and you have a lot of Jim Furyk in that lineup. So it's kind of interesting what the optimizer wants to do and how this ends up shaking out. That's basically it. I will I'll post the link so that you can view this in the description, and I'll also try to make updates to this, or I'll post updates on Twitter along the throughout the week, and we'll see how these lineups actually pan out. We have a lot of different things that we can be sweating. If this is enjoyable, again, I rarely ask you to do this. Like the video, subscribe, leave a comment below, let me know, tweet me. It's at DFS On Demand, and we'll do more of this. All right, guys, talk to you soon. Later.